After shutting down in 2016, users raised over $80,000 to bring back a browser-based doll dress-up game in November of 2022. goSupermodel's parent company, Momio APS, ran a successful crowdfunding campaign in support of the game in November of 2022. Competitor games MovieStarPlanet, Virtual Popstar, Everskies, they all operate in the same space as goSupermodel. So I did a short retrospective of goSupermodel a couple of years ago when I made this video where I kind of like went in about my falling out with Virtual Popstar's then owner, Kai. Since that video came out, Virtual Popstar now has a new owner. MovieStarPlanet 2 has launched. Everskies has taken the English-speaking world by storm, and now goSupermodel has been reborn. I want to talk a little bit about goSupermodel, its audience, and the bigger browser-based doll dress-up game industry. So let's start with a little bit about goSupermodel. The first order of business is that I'm going to be referring to goSupermodel as GSM, an acronym. When you write the acronym GSM, you want to have the G and the M lowercase and the S uppercase. Just a word for the wise. GSM was a wildly popular game produced by a Danish publisher that was called What a Game. In 2017, they changed their name to Momio, which is the name of an app they produce that, you know, it's not important, but I will refer to them as What a Game, and then once they do their name change, I refer to them as Momio. According to the company's website, the company was founded in 2004. From 2006 to 2013, the main focus was on developing and operating goSupermodel, one of the first online communities for girls in Europe. The developers claim that during its height, goSupermodel had over 30 million users registered. That might shock you if this is your first time hearing about goSupermodel. And that's probably because their primary audience is in Northern Europe. In the US and the UK, Neopets.com was popular. And GSM is kind of like if Neopets was much more popular than it was for Northern Europe. Right now I want to do one of my favorite things and walk you through Google Trends. If you're not familiar with Google Trends is just a tool that Google shares where they share their ranked search history for topics. You can pit topics against one another and see their popularity over time in different geographies. What we've got pulled up here is we've got from 2004 to present for a variety of different games. We've got goSupermodel, MovieStarPlanet, Neopets, Everskies, and Webkinz. In the United States, we had Neopets and Webkinz. They were our huge juggernauts. Right now, we're looking worldwide, and we see that globally, Neopets came first, then we had Webkinz, and then we had MovieStarPlanet. And we see this tiny little blue peak for goSupermodel. What I'm telling you is that in the United States and in the UK, we had Neopets and Webkinz, but in Northern Europe, we had a completely different landscape, and I want to show that to you. So we're going to start with the United States to get our footing. And in the United States, we had Neopets popular at first, and then Webkinz came in and swept the popularity. In the United Kingdom, Neopets holds the #1 position for the most popular for all of the categories at one time. And then MovieStarPlanet came in and became pretty popular as well. What I want to talk about is Northern Europe. I never heard of MovieStarPlanet and goSupermodel until my later years, until after they were popular and people were nostalgizing them. So let's look at Northern Europe. I know that it's most popular in Finland. goSupermodel's #1 fans are in Finland. And there we go. We've got it right there. goSupermodel in blue, the absolute 100 position. And then the red one, that's MovieStarPlanet. And then what's this? Just recently, we see that goSupermodel hits the charts again when the crowdfunding effort was happening. Let's go to their home country, Denmark. Denmark also had very high rates of goSupermodel and MovieStarPlanet, and no Neopets, and absolutely no Webkinz. It kind of makes me wonder what like the legal situation was, if Webkinz just didn't want to export, or if they were prohibited. Like, I'm not sure. I would have to look into that. Let's look at Norway. Norway, MovieStarPlanet, incredibly popular. It looks like we've got some interest as well at the end of last year about goSupermodel's relaunch. So if you've never heard of goSupermodel or MovieStarPlanet, it's not because it wasn't popular. It could just be because it wasn't popular where you were. And that's the context, that's the numbers show explaining what's going on when we talk about the popularity of these games that you may have never heard of before. The game's core experience is very close to what we see on Everskies. So there is a doll dress-up component that is kind of what you would think of when you think of the game, but probably the center of gravity for most users is the forum space. The way that the forum and the dolls integrate is that when you post on the forum, your doll shows up next to your post. So you're kind of using the doll as an avatar everywhere you go. There's also a magazine feature, which is the closest callback, I could say, the closest line connecting Everskies and goSupermodel, because goSupermodel is where we initially see the concept of a magazine editor on the game. The dolls are stylized pixel humans, and the users can purchase, trade, or win accessories, clothing, objects to customize their dolls with. In 2015, What a Game announced that it would close GSM. Users set up change.org petitions and tried to mobilize in favor of the site remaining online. Despite their efforts, the game went offline in 2016. While browsing, I found a Twitter account dedicated to advocating for the continuation of goSupermodel. It was called Saving GSM, and it was active between April 23rd and May 7th of 2015. So the tweets were mostly call to actions to email What a Game, promote the petition, and they featured collages of game avatars in an attempt to rally supporters. And this part isn't unique or special. We see this any time that a game is going to go offline. People rally in support of their online community. What's unique is what happened in October of 2022, 6 years after the game closed. Now, at this point in the story, I'm going to start referring to What a Game as Momeo, because in February 2017, they changed their name from What a Game to Momeo. Fans never stopped advocating for GSM's return, and the company continued to receive requests to relaunch the game years after its closure. According to Momeo APS's CEO, and I'm not even going to try to butcher this name with my pronunciation, I'm just going to say their CEO, an employee found an old server in a back room that contained the majority of the game's assets. In the Indiegogo campaign video, they include a video of the server being found in a server room. And for me, it's not really clear whether they set out to find the game assets or they were already having conversations or were taking it seriously internally that they would like to relaunch goSupermodel if it was possible. In my opinion, there's a pretty interesting narrative being brought about here by the copywriter. Here's the phrasing that I like to call your attention to. We believed for a long time that all the code and all the assets were long gone, but recently we decided to try and do a last dig into the past to see if there ever could be a chance to bring back goSupermodel. We had found a lot, but not all of the old assets needed to make it possible to restore most of the game and its functionalities. There's a couple implications here. For some reason, the team thought that all of the assets were gone. And then there's another phrase here. We decided to try and do a last dig. There had been digs before that. Somebody had done research before and was unable to find the assets. So this was the last effort, and we don't know if that means that they would have stopped looking at that point or if they could just stop looking at that point because they found what they were looking for, right? Like your keys are in the last place you look for because you stop looking for your keys after you find your keys. So it's unclear whether or not they were going to give up at that point or if they got to just give up at that point because they found it. Most important, the phrase that I would like you all to look at here, it was closed down in 2016 by the previous management team. the team that's presenting this Indiegogo to you is not claiming responsibility for the fact that the game was shut down. And in my mind, what this kind of jumps to is that within the organization, there must have been factions on both sides. There was the leadership that moved to shut down goSupermodel, and then there were the employees who apparently some of them weren't on board with closing down goSupermodel. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in this story, in this concept, in the game. And for me, there's a lot of interest in the politics internally at Momio of what happened. You know, Momio, the game, was taking off, and goSupermodel was like an antique game concept in the sense that it is a browser-based game. So it's really easy to imagine that some leader, some C-suite folk, was like, we should pivot to the app game because that's what the future of gaming is. That's where children are. We should go lean heavy into this other game and shut down goSupermodel. That's exactly the kind of decision that C-suite would make. Those folks, in my experience, switch positions rather frequently, and they're making more so business-minded decisions than decisions for the betterment of the long-term success of products. Right? If something's making less money quarter over quarter, regardless of if there is a dedicated fan base, you should get rid of it. I don't agree with that, but if you're trying to grow the bottom line for a company, build your resume for your next position, that might be something that you advocate for. I've been watching like Andor. That show is very political. There's a lot of political maneuvering. In my opinion, the show is best when there are heist moments, but there is a lot of bureaucracy in getting people on board with factions and movements, and I think there's a lot of interest in the wheeling and dealing of organizations. So, Danish documentary makers, what I think you should do is you should dig into what happened here at goSupermodel, because clearly there was not a unanimous decision to shut down goSupermodel, especially if there was a faction that outlasted the leaders who decided to shut down the game, who lasted long enough to bring the game back. So take it as you will. I think the story that's not getting told is the more interesting story. Yes, it's the more boring, average, everyday story that you'll probably experience in your professional career. But for me, that story, the story with people with motives who decide to close a game and then the game comes back, that story is more interesting to me. Like, why did they think the assets were gone? Was there a complete turnover of technical staff? Apparently not. Like, if somebody knew where to look. So on October 27th, goSupermodel launched an Indiegogo campaign to raise the funds to modernize and republish the game. While crowdfunding campaigns are usually like a tad bit suspicious because you don't know whether or not the team has done anything before, this was a different scenario because it was the very same company that took the game down that was talking about bringing it back online. According to Universitas, a Norwegian student publication, Momio APS used the Indiegogo campaign to detect whether there was an interest in bringing the site back. And the answer was resounding. The campaign reached its goal within 12 hours of launching. Overall, the campaign raised over 83,000 euros in November of 2022, and that's roughly 87,000 United States dollars. The Universitas article interviewed a 20-year-old student named Ma Norbeg. Beg reported that several of her peers also backed the Indiegogo. And this lines up with what I know about goSupermodel users and users in the style dress-up space. So I have a quirky habit that I've mentioned on this channel before, where I like to keep track of some user information on some of the games that I play. In the past, I mostly did this about how many users were online for various different games that I played, just so I could track their popularity over time and see when, what time of day, what games were popular. I've also done this as like a little hobby for Everskies, and I found places where users declared information about themselves, and I would pool many users and then go through their profiles and see if I could find their age declaration anywhere on their profile. So I have a couple hundred rows of cells in an Excel spreadsheet of user information that users declared on their Everskies profiles. And it's mostly like their age, but it's a few other attributes that I commonly find. Once goSupermodel went back online, I found a place which is like shouts or status updates. You could see a bunch of status updates for all of the users who were online at one time. So I was able to crunch that information, and I have, I think, around 500 users cataloged, and I was able to mine some information. This is all self-declared about their ages, etc. Of 102 declared ages, the youngest user that I've found on goSupermodel was 15 and the oldest was 28. The median age was 22. And 39% of the users were from Finland, 20% Norway, and 20% the Netherlands. A 20-year-old student backing this campaign directly lines up with the users that we see on goSupermodel now that it's launched. But more importantly, I've done this record keeping on Everskies too, and the median age there is 19 years old. I once did an exercise where I cataloged the users on Everskies who had mentioned goSupermodel, and this was several years ago, so before any news of it coming back. And those users' median age was 21 years old, which lines up with now that goSupermodel is back, the median age is 22 years old. I check users online occasionally and I check ages and stuff. It's not like very scientific. I'm just saying that based off of my experience, these numbers check out. It would make sense that students would be backing this project, considering that they are the audience for this project. Do you guys want to judge something real quick? I love to judge things. I have a feeling that you like to judge things too. I ranked the results of who's raised the most in their crowdfunding efforts of all the browser-based games that I've followed. So we've got both pet games and doll dress-up games in here. Like, how do you categorize Dapper Volk? I'm not sure. In my eyes, it's very similar to goSupermodel. It is mainly a forum with an avatar you dress up that also has a game involved with it. You know, controversial and brave, yet I say it. So let's look at the rankings. Let's reduce all of the effort and work that goes into creating these games, all of the blood, sweat, and tears, to this one metric, which is how good were you at advertising the fact that you wanted money and that you could provide this thing to people. Before we get into looking at the rankings, this is a new spreadsheet. I've just started working on the methodology of it, so I'm actually re-recording this from the first time I did it because I converted all the units to USD, which is really necessary to judge this. Before the GSM Indiegogo, the #1 top raised game was Paulboro with 87,000 USD raised. Second place was Dapper Volk with $75,000 raised. And this is the point where I say that these are just box office numbers. They have no bearing on the success of the game, the quality of the team putting it together. It's just numbers. And the illustration of that point is Flight Rising was #4 with $38,000 raised, and I think we can all agree that Flight Rising has probably made a buttload of money at this point, and I would like to put forth that the reason why it raised so little compared to these other games is because it was so early in the advent of browser-based game crowdfunding campaigns, and that if it launched today, it would compete more so with Lore Wolf, which raised $46,000. goSupermodel has had the most successful crowdfunding effort of any of these games, and I do believe that it has to do with the fact that, as I mentioned previously, it was ran by the same company that proposed it initially, and the audience for the game is at the peak of having disposable income. They're mostly students, right? They don't have kids, mortgage, etc. They have the money to put forth to a game. So that's why we see goSupermodel #1 most raised of any game that I've followed so far. I'm open to taking some critique and criticism of the way that this is ranked, because like I said, I made this spreadsheet, I made this ranking for this video. So what I've done to this point is I looked at the very day that the crowdfunding campaigns were complete, and then I took the amount in their native currency and converted it to USD for that day. So I know there's a difference with the dollar's value considering inflation from 2013 to today in 2023, right? That's a whole decade, my people. And so if you just have recommendations for stabilizing that so we can really analyze who's raised the most, I'm all ears. As I mentioned, these are just numbers. This is just like a fun metric to judge success based on. And it does not take into account monthly active users or stability within the company, etc. It's just a fun way to analyze and pit different things up against one another. Let's talk about the game experience. I've been able to set up an account and start playing goSupermodel. It really feels like a time capsule. The first time that I searched goSupermodel and saw the web page load, I thought somebody had just taken the source code for the login page and camped a site with it. Imagine my surprise when I started digging and I found out that the game was live again, using the same exact assets that it was alive with originally. Now there is some modernization probably behind the scenes in places where there was previously deprecated technology that had to be patched in order to make it functional. I could not speak to those points, I'm not a web dev. However, it looks the same from the outside, and it has certain hallmarks of a game of its era. In my opinion, the place where this is most obvious is the quality of the high fidelity images. So these are like the graphics and the logo and the illustrations on the banner where they are rasterized. And this makes sense because at the time, you were trying to lower bandwidth of loading the page so that people could access the page and not have to worry about a very large file coming to their browser every time they load a new page. And it's just so interesting to me that it looks like it did when the game closed. It looks like a 2014 game experience because it is the same experience. And I have to ask myself, are they going to modernize the UI at all? Are there going to be graphic updates? Will there be a logo change? Most notably, the goSupermodel logo on the page when it loads has a line under it, "Where girls rule." And this was mentioned during the Indiegogo that, yes, it's primarily for girls. Girls are the demographic for this game. However, they acknowledged that it's open to all people as long as you have a tolerance for quote-unquote girl talk. And this type of language was probably accepted and recepted a lot differently in 2016 than it is in 2023. We are used to more gender inclusive language, right? So it would be something instead where like "where kids rule" or "where fashionistas rule" instead of a gendered term like "girls," especially because we see on Everskies there's an interest of people of all genders to play these types of games. I'm particularly interested in whether or not we're going to see any UI updates. There's an interesting artifact of currency design on this game, and it's from the advent of pay-to-play currency. I would consider it an artifact where you wouldn't see this in a modern game, but when you buy the pay-to-play currency, you also get the native currency of the game. So if you buy gems, you also get the earned currency on the game, which is kind of like a faux pas in modern gaming, and this element still exists on the game. I wonder if they're going to change that. People tend to not like it when you can buy the earned currency on a game. There is a preference for a walled garden where the paid currency can only be acquired a certain way, and then there is the earned currency, which you cannot pay for because it ruins the whole point of there being a paid currency. A game that has a particularly elegant handling of this is Flight Rising, where users can trade one another to get the paid currency from the earned currency. In my eyes, that's kind of a perfect solution to the problem. The exact opposite would be on Neopets.com, where the paid currency can only be acquired through paying, and you cannot trade the earned currency for the paid currency. I think Neopets would see a lot of benefit from allowing a free trade of those items. It appears, I haven't really looked into it all that much on goSupermodel, but there may be some kind of way to trade the paid currency, at least. I haven't really looked into it, so leave notes on it below. goSupermodel has 2 games currently available to play. One of them is called Sketsmo, which is Pictionary, and then the other one is Wardrobe Challenge, which is a matching game where in order to clear the board, you have to click on bubbles where 2 or more of the same color are conjoined. What's notable about this game is that there is a high score displayed for the person with the highest score of that day. This is pretty ubiquitous, right? We see this on Dapper Volk, we see it across the space. For some reason, people love to share who's got the high score for today on the game. This wouldn't really matter, it wouldn't be noteworthy if the scores that people were getting were practical. And there was a small scandal where a user called a man, that's the username, a space man, had an impractically high score. And people started being like, is this person cheating? Are they not cheating? Like, it caused, for lack of a better word, a scandal. It was a spectacle. People were throwing back accusations of cheating or defenses. The user, a man, came forward and said that they were in fact cheating, and they share a GitHub link and an explanation for their cheating. A couple of days ago, I saw my girlfriend playing this wardrobe challenge, and as I love tinkering and hopping on little challenges like this, I chose to challenge myself and write a quick little computer vision program to run the game. My program took a screenshot of the board, built it internally, and played it millions of times in a clone of the Wardrobe Challenge clone that I had built. Because the game is written in HTML5, a man was able to run an instance on their own computer and write an algorithm, a script, to solve the game. And that's what they shared on their GitHub, and that's what was giving them the ability to make such incredibly high scores. I wrote a simple algorithm to parallelly, recursively search for the game-winning bubble pop order. This game is old and is not built to sustain cheating. The game runs on an HTML5 canvas, and I'm quite sure without using tons of resources, which are limited dev hours, catching something like this is ruled impossible. I had a project in mind that I wanted to build, and this is the way for me to best learn, not a cheating scandal, which is why I'm hoping to end it here with this post. This story is interesting in a couple of ways. The first way is that there are a lot of vulnerabilities on goSupermodel, and it's curious how we're going to see them get patched to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of exploits. They raised a lot of money, so we would hope to see that that money would go forth to fixing these issues. The other way it's interesting is kind of like a biblical stories reoccurring over and over, butterfly effect kind of way, which is how we got Everskies from Virtual Popstar. And so this is just a mythicization of that story, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing a part here, but isn't this the canon that there were 2 users on Virtual Popstar, Tut and Parrot, and Parrot discovered a vulnerability on Virtual Popstar and came to the conclusion, hey, it's not hard to run one of these games. So Tut and Parrot started Everskies, which is arguably the most popular doll dress-up game on the internet right now. Like, when it comes to browser-based virtual doll games, Everskies has taken the English world by storm. And isn't it kind of similar to this story right here, where a man sees his girlfriend playing this game and is just like, hey, I could probably exploit that if I tried. And then once you do that, you say, wait a minute, the rest of this isn't all that hard to reverse engineer. Why don't we just do this? And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying, like, it could happen theoretically. Like, these stories could replay just forever when it comes to vulnerabilities on games being exploited. Returning to the story of goSupermodel's Wardrobe Challenge, the game went offline for a little while, and then it came back up, and I assumed that means it's patched. I'm not really sure. For context, my lifetime top score on Wardrobe Challenge is level 3, which means I cleared the board 2 times, and I made it to level 3. However, the goSupermodel all-time top record at this very moment is held by a user who got to level 123. So it's possible I'm just really bad at this game, or I don't know, maybe like there are exploits out there that are not patched. I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything since this story, so just saying. How do we begin to talk about the legacy of goSupermodel and the impact that it has now that it's back? We have a crowded space, some would say. We've got Everskies, we've got Virtual Popstar, which, according to some of the shouts and some of the forum posts I've watched, say that presence on Virtual Popstar has dwindled since goSupermodel has come back line. It's hard to judge the impact on Everskies since you're not allowed to talk about other games on Everskies, from what I understand. So we're not really seeing forum posts or mentions of goSupermodel being back online. However, it's not too hard to trace the fact that those games draw influence from goSupermodel. We have the literal founding of Virtual Popstar in reference to goSupermodel, and then we have elements on Everskies like the magazine, which is a direct callback to goSupermodel's feature. The games mirror each other in design. Right now on Kickstarter, there is a game called Laylola Paradise that's getting funded, which is the reason why I looked up goSupermodel in the first place, because I couldn't really remember if it was goSupermodel or MovieStarPlanet. Apologies, I'm not native to either of those games that had a similar avatar style. And that's how I came across this story in the first place, that goSupermodel was back. Even though I was wrong, it's MovieStarPlanet that Laylola Paradise seems to be replicating in design. But make no mistake, there would not be an active field of competitor games without games like goSupermodel having existed in the first place. Now, MovieStarPlanet is a very successful franchise in its own right. I'm just saying that without the storied success of goSupermodel, we may not have seen a rise of a game like MovieStarPlanet. Who knows? Maybe we could have. All I'm saying is Laylola Paradise is currently in Kickstarter, and it makes me wonder, like, how familiar with the landscape the game is, because the avatars, the doll dress-up component of this game is kind of like this vectorized model that reminds me of MovieStarPlanet, when we're seeing so much success with the pixel doll space because of the consistency of the materials and the technique to make the assets, has a pretty accessible learning curve, and it's easy to do on many different devices at different skill levels. I see a stark contrast in the stylizing of pixel dolls and vector dolls. And it's really up to the beholder whether or not you see equal beauty in these different mediums. On the note of competitive landscape awareness, Laylola Paradise's Instagram account seems to be following Everskies accounts almost exclusively. I remember the day that I found their Instagram account, they were following nobody, and now they are following a bunch of Everskies accounts, so they are aware of what the opportunity is and where to find it. But this video is not about Lolula Paradise. Maybe we'll get one about their crowdfunding campaign because there's a lot to talk about there. This is about goSupermodel. I'm interested in monitoring the behavior of this platform now that it's back on and seeing how the popularity competes with other games in its space, right? Is this going to give Everskies a run for its money? I don't really think so. I think that they have different user targets. I think that goSupermodel is for the nostalgic class, while Everskies is for a much younger demographic who would like to nostalgize for this era of games but simply wasn't alive for it. So they're experiencing a type of secondhand nostalgia, right? There's a lot of MySpace reimagining on Everskies user profiles by users who never had their own MySpace accounts. Anyways, I hope that this was interesting to you. For me, this is an opportunity to do a retrospective of a video that I've wanted to do for a long time, but didn't necessarily have access to the assets or a compelling storyline. So I'm glad that we were finally able to get this tied up. And this is my experience of goSupermodel so far. If you're interested in just some more context in the drama of the browser-based doll game space, I do have a playlist called Dolls Makers, and in it I have context in the history and the rise of Everskies. I also have context around Virtual Popstar and how it connects to Everskies and how it connects back to goSupermodel. This video is a spiritual successor, a spiritual sequel to the last video that I did about Virtual Popstar. In that playlist, I also have some documentaries from other YouTubers about doll dress-up games. So if this is something you're interested in, I've got more content. Go check out that playlist. Anyways, thanks for watching this video. I want to keep the meta conversation about this channel pretty light, but I changed my username from PetSummerJulie to PSJulie, and that's just to facilitate branching out into a little bit more types of content, especially because I do make a lot of dolls content, and, you know, that's not pet simulating, it's doll dressing. So, new channel name. I would like to relaunch my Patreon at some point, so just keep your eyes peeled for that. And otherwise, you know, just thanks for sticking with me, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one whenever that happens. Thanks. Bye.